Now on this video, I'm going to try to share some tips and some good information about buffing the final clear. Now in this case, we're using a collector bike, Vlad's Bimota, but this would work on a brand new motorcycle. Same technology would work on if you have a car, a van. I've done this to my minivan. I've done this to motorcycles that are 10 years old and motorcycles that are basically brand new. Now, some of the good information that I always suggest to people before you buff something out is to find a test piece, something that you can do a little wet sanding with 2500 and get comfortable with the idea of sanding a part flat with 2500 before you dig into a job like this. 4CR products, this is 8021, but 8065 is a very similar product. There's very little difference in the grits, and it's good to have both and try both to see which one is going to be the better of the two compounds. Now, there's some basic 101 things for buffing that I like to share with people. First of all, I'm not happy till a part is buffed. Some people don't care. Some people like the look of, and I call it the wet look, that when you spray the final spray and there may be some dust in it, this is a part that's not sanded out, that's the wet look. Some people like that look, and it's fine. But for the real people that are very, very fussy, you want to buff out the parts. And the first part of it, of course, is to sand it with 2500 before you go to this step. This is not about sanding. This is about the buffing. Now, the two products that I use, 8021, 8065. 8021 and 8065 are almost exactly alike. I always test both on some little area to see which I like the best. And in this case, 8021 already won that little battle. The very slight difference in the product, the 4CR products, is the one is a little grittier, takes a little more material off. So you wouldn't want to combine them. You can see I have written on that cap medium. There's also one that's even rougher than this. But the whole objective of this process is to remove the orange peel. Now, the orange peel comes from when you spray the part. If you're spraying under super controlled conditions, a heated spray booth with a wet floor and $1,000 spray gun, you might get away with not having a buffed part. But in our case, we're not doing this under those conditions. We're usually dealing with the fact that we have to paint outdoors. The weather isn't always perfect. And we're trying to keep this on a budget. This buffer that I use is about $25 from Harbor Freight. Sometimes you can get them for $20. I mark each buffer. You see the yellow tape is indicating that this has 8021 on it. This is a very, very artsy kind of thing. It's not a scientific thing where you could tell somebody do this, 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 and this, and it'll always work. It's going to be according to the hardness of the paint. Now, I put this in fast forward so the video wouldn't get too long. You don't need a lot of this product. You don't need to put gallons of it on, but it is advisable when you're doing a part like this collector bike part, or if you're doing your own bike and you want it to be perfect, or your car. The part has to be sanded with 2500 or 2000 even. It's not really super critical, but this process allows you to get the buffing done relatively quickly. Now, in my case, I want to avoid any edges, any high spots. I'll do those by hand. And I want to run the buffer. What I'm trying to show is that I'm using the buffer and moving it at a predictable rate. I'm not taking the buffer and just holding it in one spot until I get the finish I want. That kind of wears away more paint than you need. And it's always a good idea to wipe it down in between buffing sessions and just look at what you've accomplished. Now, in this case, I showed some of this. Look at the difference here in the finish, the orange peel finish. I'm not sure everybody can see this, but the part that's buffed, that light is really reflecting off it. And the test I always have for this kind of buffing is I used to have a TV playing right in my shop. If I can see my reflection in it, or if I can, I call it watching TV in the part. Yeah, then I know I'm going in the right direction. Now, I can rub my face, and of course your face or your arm is very delicate or sensitive or whatever. And I used to let Karen come down and touch that, and she'd say, ooh, that feels nice. But anyway, some of the tips, we're just trying to pass on tips in a very short, concise video. The tips that all make sense when you do this are to have the part completely sanded, again, 2000 or 2500. Avoid the edges. Do the edges and around the corners and around the scoops. Those areas, do them very carefully by hand. And Kirkland microfibers seem to be a really good product to use in conjunction with this buffer. Now, the funny thing about buffing is, and I've learned this the hard way, I would take one batch of paint and it would be maybe a week old, let's say, and I'd go to buff it, and it would have take them a certain amount of time to do the buffing. Then I'd take paint like on my GS that's 40 years old and buff it, and the technique is just a little bit different. And that's why the products like the 8021 and the 8065, sometimes you get away with using the grittier product and it'll still come up like a mirror, and sometimes that when the paint is soft, the grittier product will leave little baby scratches that you can see, in which case you go to a finer compound like 8021. And if you can still, and this is a good tip, if you can still see the scratches and you've used a brand new pad on a buffer, an 8021, and you've done your best buffing it and you can still see scratches, the final thing is to buff it with a fresh pad that doesn't have any other product on it, and something like Flitz. Or Meguiar's Cleaner Wax is another one that's super fine, and that'll usually put on a really nice shine. The ultimate shine. And the ultimate shine will be that when you hold it up to, I'm working under fluorescent lights always looking under fluorescent lights, and if you don't see any scratches in that final little part, then you really have arrived at something that I think is as nice as you can ever make a painted part. And especially if it's something that you're very passionate about, or you want to take your bike to motorcycle shows, or you just want to go to the meetups and show people, well, you know, your skill and the effort that you've put into a restoration. Now in this case, this Bimota is one I've worked on several times, and it is a true collector bike, and everything we do on this motorcycle is made to be as good. Look at the reflection of the light. Now that's the one incandescent light I have that I use just to do what I'm doing right now. So I can see the reflection, I can candle it, and when I'm done with that, it's ready for some Flitz, and then a few coats of nice carnauba wax, any kind of carnauba wax, and then the reassembly of the motorcycle. So I hope there was some useful information on the video. Vlad has a wonderful collection of exotic bikes, a Mondale, some of the KTM, Aprilia, BMW. We're going to be doing one of his BMWs very soon, and it's going to be one of our next shop projects. But his stuff is all buffed. If you see any of these bikes in real life, you know he's taken the time to do all the buffing, and all the carbon fiber work shines like a mirror. And hopefully we've been able to share our passion for motorcycling with you through this video, and we do try to post up a new video almost every day. So and thanks so much for watching.